Hello and welcome back to our show. This is Sarah Nicole Nadler, your host, and today I'm very excited to invite special guest Destiny Bounds onto our show to talk to you about estate planning. Hey Destiny, how's it going today?
Hello, Sarah. Doing wonderful. How are you?
Doing well, keeping it cool despite the warm weather, and I'm excited to go for a motorcycle ride after this afternoon after we finish.
I'm going to the pool, so I'm right there with
Yeah.
you.
Sounds good. Well, for those of you who don't know Destiny, I would love to introduce her a little bit more. Destiny Bounds is the founder of Bounds Law LLC and also Bound for Destiny Consulting. Isn't that the coolest name for a consulting company ever? And she is become a really dear friend of mine here in Kansas City. Destiny, will you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure thing. So I would call myself a business and kind of IP attorney. In my law firm, I work with all types of small businesses at every stage of their business, helping them from formations, contracts, trademarks, copyrights, all those things, including kind of what we're going to talk to you today about business succession planning and how that fits in specifically to your personal estate plan, which is so important. And then on my consulting business, I truly just help all type of female entrepreneurs and creating you'll learn more about what me and Sarah have just kind of capitalize on, I guess, passive income, which we love. So I'm just here to help out not just small businesses today, but also just to kind of help out anyone who is needing assistance on leaving your legacy, right? So
Yeah, I think that with it being Memorial Day, this is a really great topic to cover because, right, we all want to leave a legacy behind that is meaningful, I think. And I'm curious, for those of you who are on right now, we would love to hear from you in the comments. How do you want to be remembered? Is there a specific word that comes to mind where you're like, I really want to be known as someone who was honest or someone who was powerful, right? Someone who was ambitious woman or independent. I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are today as we think about the men and women, the brave men and women who have sacrificed so much for our country and the legacy that they left behind. I think setting a good example comes to mind, and how can we leave a legacy behind that is one that we wanted to leave, instead of what happens to a lot of families is, something happens unexpectedly. We never know when something's going to happen, right? And they end up leaving a legacy that's not so pleasant or even a hot mess financially and legally for their family. So today, Destiny and I are going to help you be causative, be impactful, be in control of the legacy that you leave behind. So that's the topic today. For those of you who are familiar with my show, you know that I always have free, awesome stuff that I give away on every single week on our episodes. So today's freebie is a copy of my free disaster planning session. So this is actually a 45-minute consultation with me where I walk you through all of the most common financial and natural and man-made disasters that can approach your family or can occur to your family or your business. For those of you who don't know, my father, Joe, actually owns a disaster preparedness company. And so I grew up helping families to handle some pretty devastating situations like a fire in their home or even just a pipe breaking. And I have seen the dark side of what happens when a family isn't financially or emotionally prepared for that kind of disaster. And as small business owners, as entrepreneurs, we also have this enormous power to really create an impact in our community during a disaster. In fact, right now, as we're recording this, Destiny, I'm curious if this is happening for you right now, but I know that there are several clients who reached out to me today because they don't have power down in Kansas City right now. There's whole swaths of Kansas City.
was actually just talking to somebody about that, and there's still like 25,000 or something people without power as we are talking right now, which is just
And it's hot and humid outside. And if you
and,
have health issues or if you have elderly people or kids and there's no air conditioning, that could be a pretty big deal.
so, and it's not just families though. So I've seen now several businesses that had to shut down yesterday and could not, do their job because there was no power in their building.
Yeah, and because of what I learned from my dad and the fact that my husband's a little bit of a prepper, we actually live on a 16-acre farm that's completely off grid. So the fact that there's no power in Kansas City and in parts of Leavenworth has not affected us at all. In fact, I didn't even know that until my client started to tell me. And I invited them to come up to the farm today if they need to get some work done or charge their phone, because we have massive solar panels in my backyard on our beautiful 16-acre farm. We also are on well water. Like, there are so many disasters that my family and my business have been prepared for so that we can be of service to the community instead of the other way around, where we're having to sit around hoping that someone will come take care of us. So if you're interested in learning how to protect your family in case of disasters, or in the case of business succession, or when you pass away, making sure that everybody's going to be fine, comment the word freebie below and I will gift you my free guide today. All right. So without further ado, let's get right into our training today. I want to start with this great quote from Ronald Reagan. He said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." Whew, okay. He said, "We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream," right? Like, estate planning isn't just something you're born with, right? And he goes on to say, "It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same." So think of the freedoms that we have today, right? Think of the freedoms that the brave men and women in our country sacrificed to give us, like workers' rights and, the right for people of color to be treated the same as everyone else, right? The women's rights, the fact that Destiny and I can even be business owners at all, right? Destiny, you probably know, what year was it that women were finally given the right to pass the bar exam?
Oh, Lord, it was only like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It was not that long ago at all.
So while we're protecting our freedoms, while we're celebrating today, this, Memorial Day and everything it means, I also want to really talk about, like he said, right? It's not passed down in the bloodstream. We actually have to take some actions to protect the wealth that you've built, to protect the legacy that you want to leave behind. So I thought that was a great quote for today.
Perfect.
And Ronald Reagan also said entrepreneurs and their small businesses are responsible for almost all the economic growth in the United States. So when we talk about the economy and what's happening with the economy, we often poke fingers at the government. We kind of poke fingers at the stock market. But the truth is, the stock market's just a heartbeat. It's actually just a signal of what the market is doing, right? And his statement has proved to be true. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, small businesses employ half the population. Okay, we are responsible for what happens in the economy. And small businesses account for 43% of America's GDP. So when we don't do estate planning, okay, when we don't take responsibility and do that adulting as small business owners, as entrepreneurs, we have a very big impact, not only on our family, but on the entire economy. So again, as we're talking about being American and being responsible, I just wanted to bring up a few of these statistics. Destiny, did you have something you wanted to add here?
Sure thing. I love how you said that we have a responsibility, because I think that's the one thing that sometimes us as business owners, especially, if you're a solopreneur, you're a one person consultant or a one person type and you don't have employees and you think, well, if I died, it doesn't matter. Well, you actually are the one that matters. You can be almost sometimes the one that is truly the one that can matter, because your family is probably still there. And that's where I really just love that word responsibility, and just remembering that today as we go through some of this. But these statistics are kind of staggering here on the slide. If you really look at it, as for, businesses, 80% of businesses are family owned. This is a true story. That's my background. I am from, I'm a fourth generation entrepreneur myself. That is why I love helping small businesses. And my dad, we worked and we did all those things in my family owned business, and my parents could have stories too. And they, as Sarah said, generate more than half of the gross national product. That's humongous. And 70% of family businesses fail or are sold before the second generation takes over. And a lot of that, if you look at those numbers, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like if you don't have an estate planning in place, and how it just creates so much chaos, not even just on a legal level, but a personal level for you and your family. So only 12% of businesses, and Sarah, as you know, I'm just learning that last statistic, but only 12% of businesses remain active by the third generation. So having a plan in place could not be more important about what does that look like? And as I was saying earlier, I come from the business side of this. So we do a more like a business succession plan, right? Package type thing where we come in and we are doing not just planning the business succession, but the estate planning side, that personal estate planning side, which we'll focus on this today. But just know that this is part of that when you are a business owner. And I think, Sarah, you'll be getting into more of that in just a second as well. But it's just, you got to think about these numbers, and it's not just the big businesses, or if you have employees, this is also you. If you are a small family owned business by yourself, or maybe you have a really large side gig or something that you just don't want to get tied up. So super important.
Yeah, and for those of you, again, who are watching us live or even on the replay, comment below. I'm curious to hear, are you a first generation entrepreneur? You're the first person in your family to ever own a business? Or are you second generation like me, or third or fourth generation like Destiny? And if you are second, third, fourth generation, etc., does your family still own that original business? Or like these statistics show, are you one of those families who's had to start a new business every generation because that succession plan piece was missing, right? I'm really curious to hear in the comments, where are you on this spectrum?
And that would have definitely been the first two generations of my family. I've been very fortunate where my father, on the third to the fourth, have kind of, some of that has trickled. But between the first and the second, no. And I can tell, maybe we'll get into some of those stories, but yes.
I think we would love to hear some more stories, but let's continue on and we'll get into the meat and potatoes, because I know a lot of people are probably like, okay, so now what do I do, right? Like, what do I do with all this information? So the first thing I want to address, which is not the main topic we're going to cover today, but it is important, is if you are a business owner, it's important to understand the 5 things, the 5 choices that your family will have when you are no longer around, when it comes to your business, okay? Now, a short little story I will share is the very first time I ever had this happen with a client. It was obviously devastating for her family. I called her office one day for our coaching call, and I was told that she was hospitalized. And this woman was around my age now. This was many years ago, but she was in her late 30s. So it was completely unexpected. And we came to find out later that she'd had a brain tumor and didn't know it. And she was actually hospitalized with a stroke, and she never woke up. It was very sad. And of course, her family was devastated, but the most devastating part about this was the fact that there were no plans in place, right? This was long before I got my license as a financial advisor. So I was ignorant as her consultant on what should have been done. I had encouraged her to go get a will set up because I noticed that she didn't have one, but she literally said to me, "Sarah, that's not what I hired you for." And I was like, whoa, okay, And so I didn't insist, and I really regret that. And so when that happened, her family lost the income from her small business because she was the expert. She was the only one in the family who knew how to run that business. So it's important to be aware of the impact. The more financial responsibility you take on in the family, right? Now you have dependents, even your spouse. If you retire your spouse, which is becoming very popular these days, right? To talk about retiring our spouses. When you do that, you have to recognize that now you're it, right? And just having life insurance in place isn't enough. We have to have an actual plan of what will happen to the business. So here's the 5 things that could be done by your family. These are their choices when you're no longer around. 1, they could sell your business to a partner. So if your business already has a business partner, your family could choose to sell that business to your partner. For example, if I, knock on wood, but if anything ever happened to me tomorrow, Ben, my husband, could reach out to Destiny and say, "Hey, Destiny, would you like to retain ownership of the other?" I think, Destiny, you've got 17% or something of the passive income pathway. He could just reach out to her and say, "Hey, do you want to buy the rest? Yeah. I could use the cash right now because something happened to Sarah, and we would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind going and getting an SBA loan and buying us out," right? Like, hey, help him keep the farm or something, right? Don't worry, I've got Ben perfectly taken care of. He won't need to do that. But it's an example, right? If you have a business partner, your family can reach out to that business partner and say, "Hey, can we facilitate you to buy us out so that we have some cash to pay bills or handle, what needs to be handled?" The other option is find a private buyer. So let's say I didn't have a business partner. Well, we can just go to random Joe on the street and say, "Hey, do you want to buy a business?" Believe it or not, there's actually a Facebook group that has over 100,000 people in it. And it's all about buying and selling small businesses. Yeah, buying and selling small businesses. So you can just drop a post in a Facebook group at these days, and that can be your succession plan. I mean, it's really that simple. In some industries, it's a little bit more common to get a buyout or a merger. So especially in like the healthcare space, I see this a lot, or in the SaaS space, right? If you have a software as a service, or if you're a private healthcare practitioner, it's pretty common to, when you hit retirement age or when you pass away and you don't have any kids who went to medical school, to have a buyout or a merger. You can also just pass it on to your kids. My father has 2 sons, my brothers, who have both worked in his business since they were kids, right? I was crawling around in crawl spaces and doing bookkeeping for my dad in high school, right? Like all of us kids were involved in his business, and both of my brothers now are very interested in owning that business when dad retires or if something happens to him. And in fact, my dad has approached me with concerns about, hey, I want to make sure your brothers never fight about this business. And so we've put plans in place, right, to ensure that no matter what happens, his kids will not be fighting over his multi-million-dollar business, right? This is very important because that, again, right, we're coming right back to the question I asked at the beginning. How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the one who sparked off a bitter feud between your children? I don't think anybody wants that as a legacy, right? And then the last thing is you can liquidate its assets. Now that is probably going to get you the least amount of actual money of all of these plans. Liquidating the assets of your business is kind of a choice of last resort. And we want to put systems in place to avoid that being necessary. So Destiny, will you take just a moment here and give us maybe 2 or 3 examples of legal tools we can put in place to ensure that we don't end up having to liquidate and our family is capable of doing one of these other 4 choices?
Yes. And I want to make one just quick comment about also going back to that. You can go back to that slide real fast. When you're, just so people know, also what I get a lot is, instead of even just selling business to a partner, sometimes that can be an employee in your business. So do keep in mind that can also be an employee. I do those quite a bit. And one of those tools is a buy-sell agreement. That's what we do, again, in my, like, if we're doing a legal business succession plan package, our package here, we would do a buy-sell agreement so that that employee can buy it out eventually. And what that kind of looks like, that would be one of the kind of tools that we use. And that buy-sell agreement can also be used for a partner or a contractor or anybody else, a private business owner, whatever that may look like. And I will say, and this is kind of not what you asked, Sarah, but on the liquidating of your assets, I will say it is a last resort. That's what we don't want. That's the whole point of doing a business succession and an estate planning type thing, because that's where that liquidating of assets is going to get caught up, what we'll talk about in a second, into that intestate as well. So not just your personal estate planning is getting caught up in that, but all that liquidating of assets, if that's our only option, that is where we're going to have the major issues. So having like a buy-sell agreement or whatever agreements that we need in place, emergency preparedness plan, contingency plan, all those things, we can work with you on the legal side to have that set up where liquidating your assets is not the only choice you have. And it cannot be.
That is Sarah, great. Thank you. Okay, so I want to get into the meats and potatoes today. So Destiny, will you go ahead and start with?
Yeah, this goes right into what I was talking about. Yep. So when we're talking about intestate, this is kind of where I'm talking about probate court. This is an actual court that most states, local governments are going to have a separate court for this because there's so much of this. If something happens, all those assets that you own, your home, your car, your investment, your business, will be sent to probate court. And what that kind of means is the official proving of a will. I like the way that's worded. If you have a will, if you don't have a will, then we're going to go to what's called next. I'll just have you, I think that's on the next slide, but essentially,
sure, sorry, 1 second.
Love these slides, but no,
maybe not.
We'll get into it in a second. So probate court, though, this is where everything's going to happen. If you have a will in place, if you have the proper estate planning documents, it's going to go by super quick. everything will be fine. Sometimes, you can even get away without even having to go to probate court. Anytime you go to court, it's obviously a ton of money. You are paying an attorney per hour to do something like that. And guess what? That is coming out of any money that's in the estate, that's in the inheritance that you would be receiving, right? And then on this slide, what we're trying to say is most small family-owned businesses do not survive this long of wait. So how long, I want you guys to think about how long could your business survive without its owner, without you? Let's say that. How long could it actually survive without you? Right? And probably not too long. So your probate court can be years if you are caught in the middle without a will. And there are different types of probate courts, but that's essentially what you want to know is probate court is where you're going to be going once, or your family would be going, right? If you die. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So you want to add anything?
Destiny, correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot sell any of those assets while you're still in probate court. So this is where coming back to business succession planning, it's so important, right?
Yes. So, yeah, sorry. I'll give some more examples too, because if you have so let's say you don't have a will in place, and you have a house full of furniture and mirrors and all these things, your family just can't go in and take them. If you don't have a will in place that even says where that stuff goes, it is supposed to just stay there until it is completely decided by the court who owns what. I have seen families that literally are fighting for months because someone came in and took all of the jewelry of one of their, mother or something, being like, well, she wanted me to have it. Well, if it's not really in a will, technically it's kind of like in just a limbo situation. And then you could end up you could end up paying money back to the other side because you went and took those items and you weren't supposed to yet. So, yeah.
Or what about bills, right? Like, let's say you are still owed a mortgage on that home. That money is going to have to keep being paid, even though we can't sell it, right? We're not allowed to sell it because it's in probate court because there was no will. But we also have to keep paying that mortgage or it's going to be drawn out of the account, right? And then same with our business, right? So remember, we talked about those 5 different options. 3 of them involve selling the business. We're not allowed to do any of that if that business is still in probate court.
If we got a buy-sell agreement, though, I tell you what, that's immediately going to go into place. Whatever that agreement is set up beforehand, that's going to go into place. That's why that piece is so important.
That's why you want to have an estate attorney on your side. So I'm just talking up Destiny here for a minute, but she is so important. Don't leave your family in that situation where they're struggling to keep your business still going because you're no longer there and they're not allowed to sell it and they're not allowed to do anything else with it because you didn't have a buy-sell agreement in place or you didn't have an estate plan, right? So this is why I'm so grateful, Destiny, that you came today so we can talk about these things.
Thank you.
All right. Now, I know you said you have a plan for us on how to actually create an estate plan and how it all kind of fits together. Would you mind sharing that with me?
Absolutely. So I'm sure you guys are like, okay, well, what do I actually do now? Like okay, so I want to do this. How does that look like? Do I just go to an attorney? You could, but I could also, I'm going to walk you through a few steps so you're prepared of what that looks like. You've got some tools in place where once you go to an attorney, you're going to be able to say, here's my stuff. And it's not just like a long conversation, and honestly, you'll probably be charged less too. So first step, we've got to identify all the assets that you own. And you can get as granular as you want on this. We've got to identify, though, that home, that car, the physical possessions that you have, your investments, insurance policies, what's in the business, all that stuff. We're going to sit down and we're going to identify that. And if you can do that on your own, that's a major feat than sitting down and paying an attorney several $100s an hour, right? And then we're going to take those assets and we're going to do kind of an evaluation. We're going to evaluate them so we understand their worth. That's what we're getting about. Maybe not some of the granular things, but we can generally come up with an amount of what the car is worth, the home is worth. Maybe you don't
The
necessarily know
business.
what business is worth, but a plan in place of how to get a business valuation, what that's going to look like. That's a lot of times what we're doing in a buy-sell agreement. We're having maybe a business valuation done early on, or maybe we're setting up who's going, an independent evaluator would be doing that, right? But we're doing the best we can on what the worth is. And then how those assets are going to be distributed. And in this place is where we're really talking about those, because this is where it has those tax implications, those financial implications, kind of what Sarah is getting into, why we're trying to not just, leave our family with, being able to inherit what you have, but we also can save them money because of the taxes on this. So these 2 steps are really the ones that you can do right away. You can do this today, tomorrow. And I actually have a freebie for you guys as well. We have a pretty in-depth, we call it our kind of estate planning preparedness checklist, where it's going to set out, different areas of how you can set out the assets, their worth, give you examples of what those look like. And then if you can fill out that sheet to the best of your ability, that is going to leave you in a really, really good place. So if you guys want that, feel free to put in the comments checklist, and my team will send you out that preparedness checklist so you can get started on thinking about what assets you have, what they're worth, what you don't know yet. Start looking around your house, start looking around your life. And I'll tell you the one thing, I was going to get into this later, but the one thing I usually get is, well, I don't have anything. Okay. If you're a business owner at all, though, you have something, period. I don't care if you are a solopreneur or you have 10 employees, you have something, right? It's kind of hard for somebody who's like, well, I just kind of started this business and I don't have anything. You have something. If you have a car, you have something. If you have a business, a bank account, a business or personal, you have something, and it's worth doing some type of an estate planning. So if you guys want this, please today, comment checklist, or even later on, if you're watching the recording, comment checklist, or send me a direct message. And I would love for you guys to have this preparedness checklist. This is what will save you time and money if you bring this to an attorney. So it's going to really set that out. Mm-hmm.
And Destiny, you mentioned you have something, even for those who maybe think they don't. Will you talk a little bit about how intellectual property is one of the things that we want to look at as an asset when we're doing estate planning? Because I know we could do a whole episode on just that, but that is sort of your
get into all sorts of things.
And I know you're writing a book on this subject right now too. So I think it would be great to hear a little bit more about what is intellectual property, just in brief, and how does that fit into our estate plan? How is that an asset?
Yeah, absolutely. So intellectual property, it's going to be something in your business that's a creation of the mind, right? So it's a trademark, it's a copyright, it's a patent, maybe trade secrets. Trademarks are things like your name, your logo, your slogan. Those are going to be the most common type of intellectual property that I see. And people just, I truly believe this, and so many people are jumping on this bus, but your largest asset in your business is your intellectual property. You can do so much with your IP. You can do what's called licensing it, which this isn't a sale. We're not outright selling your intellectual property. You're leasing it. One of the biggest things so Disney, for instance, I don't know the exact percentage now, but a couple of years ago, it was like 70% of Disney's revenue was from its intellectual property, literally just licensing out Mickey Mouse, artwork and stuff like that for you to use, small businesses to use on shirts and stuff like that. You pay a small licensing fee and you can use it in your business. They're not selling it to you outright. You don't get full rights to it. You have to use it in a certain way, but this is how they make money. And in any business, I truly believe that about 90, I'd probably say 95, not to get into a side note, but franchising is where you're actually buying the license. But other than that, most businesses, you are going to have intellectual property that you can sell. And that is something that we want to make sure, if that's being licensed out to somebody, if you were to die, we want to make sure that that can still be sold. And if we don't have that clearly written into something, that could create all types of confusion. Not to mention your intellectual property, as I said, not only your biggest asset, but can truly just come in and make money for you when you die. So that is something that you could leave as one of the biggest legacies for your family. And especially here today on Memorial Day, I think that is something to think about. So if we go back to that slide, I love talking about intellectual property. Sorry, I had to cut myself off because I love that stuff, guys.
I know. We'll just go on and on.
Well,
But you should pick up a copy, guys, if you want to learn more about that. Pick up a copy of our book. Destiny and I wrote a book. We literally wrote the book on intellectual property and how to use it to earn passive income. So definitely check out a copy of our book.
And those are what we want to continue on for your family, right? Those are the things. And if you have any type of passive income sources, we want to make sure that they're in place and they're not getting caught up in what we call probate court, right? Okay, so after you've identified, you have evaluated your assets, you just kind of decided how much they're worth, who they're going to go to, then we've got to start on the decision-making process. So you're going to need to consider even further who you kind of want to inherit those assets and what happens though if that person what's called predeceases you. So say for instance you've set that will in place or your plans in place where you want your car to go to your son. And, we don't want this to happen, but just in case, like, let's say your son does die before you. So what happens? We think about who's going to be a backup. A lot of times, if you come to us, that's really where we're, as an attorney, getting into the nitty gritty with you, where I was having this discussion with Sarah earlier. I get a lot of questions of, well, can I just have LegalZoom do it? Yes, LegalZoom could do it. I mean, legally they can, but should they be doing it? Probably not, because this is where they're not going to get into you. They're set into a little box with their 10, 15, 20 questions, and they don't think outside the box. This is where an attorney can come in and we can start thinking outside the box on what could happen, because LegalZoom's not going to think about, okay, well, and again, this gets a little morbid, I'm sorry, guys, but let's say you have a son who has a lot of health issues, okay? Well, an attorney's going to pick up on that right away and say, you know what, let's make sure maybe we have 2 backups instead of just 1 backup. We start thinking about that way so that we're making sure that you are protected on all sides, because if it's not there, guess what? If we don't have somebody, if somebody predeceases, guess what? It has to go through intestate again. We have to go back to probate court and stuck into that years of being decided instead of just having the will in place that sets it out. So just know LegalZoom can do very, 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 very basic things, but really it's not going to be thinking outside the box, which is what you need on something like this, that especially if you're a business owner, there is just no way LegalZoom could do anything for as complicated as your business, just how different all businesses are. So once you've kind of thought through those things, though, then we're going to document your wishes into the legal documents such as wills and trusts, and I'll explain those in just a second. But we are going to make those clear, we're going to set out every scenario we can kind of think of, and then that's going to be that legally binding document that will supersede any type of court that would, come in. And then lastly, you're looking at reviewing and updating. And I cannot stress this, if anything today, even if you have an estate plan already, you're listening to this and you're like, I've already got an estate plan. Maybe I just need the business succession. I'll come do that. Well, we still need to be reviewing and updating what you currently have, because I will tell you your situation will change all the time. And I get it. It's kind of like annoying because, it could change every year, because maybe you decided you don't want to give it to a charity or something again, because some people like to leave things to charity. And you're like, now I want to leave it to my 2 new grandkids that I didn't know were coming. Or the foster kid adopted kid, or whoever. These things happen. So whenever you're having major life events, or maybe not even a major life event, but something that you think would change your will, be thinking about that. This is something that maybe you set on your calendar that once a year, when you're like, if you're a business owner, when you're planning your business, you make this as part of that checklist of, hey, do I need to update my business succession and estate planning plan in place? Because again, if we have things undecided, remember, if there's things that it doesn't make sense, or now we have a situation where somebody needs to decide where it goes, we're stuck in these really bad situations. So this is kind of the process. And then I think the next slide, if you want to go to that.
Yeah, we're going to talk for a minute about,
you want to go
just, yeah, the risks of not planning.
Yeah,
Then we have
this
the
is
elements of a good estate plan. So
right,
can we talk a little bit about what happens if we
really what
don't
I
put
was
all
wanting
these
to
things
get
in
into.
place? Okay, good.
So first, if you pass away without an estate plan, which is legally known as dying intestate. Okay, so when I say intestate, we're really talking about you died without any type of estate plan in place. Your assets are going to be distributed according to state law. It will not be decided really according to your wishes per se. A lot of times that is where it gets so complicated because you have family members that think it should be a certain way because maybe one took care of you throughout the last year of your life or something, and they think that they deserve more than the other family members who have just completely said, I don't want anything to do with you. Or maybe they said before you passed away, no, I'm not helping. This is really high. Again, I'm really sorry to be, I feel like I'm being the negative attorney today, but maybe you have a family or a family member or a sister who said, no, I'm not helping with mom. I don't want anything to do with her. I don't want any of her money or anything like that before she passes away. Okay, well, fine. But guess what? If you don't have a will in place, it's going to be distributed by state law. And usually that's just based upon a familiar level, familiar meaning just where you're at in the family. They're not going to really get into, a lot of states won't get into, okay, well, what did mom say? And what did mom want, or what did such and such the siblings say beforehand. They're not going to really get into that. So second, if you don't have a proper estate plan, your family may face larger tax burden. This is the one thing that I don't think a lot of, especially business owners, consider. There's so many tax implications on your business when you go to sell it. And you can avoid a lot of those things by maximizing on like a good estate plan that's considering maybe things in trusts and stuff like that. Again, I'll get into a trust in a little bit more, but essentially that's something where we can really talk about how you're not passing on additional financial burden to your family. And then without a plan, this is the main thing I want you guys to remember. It is a very, very long, expensive probate process, which is financially and emotionally draining on your loved ones. Okay. So I'll give you guys an example. I don't think we had a slide with examples, right? Like this is.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, then I will give you guys an example. So this is a pretty somewhat recent because it's still kind of going on. So Prince died in 2016. And he actually died without, which blows my mind, he died without an estate plan, like a massive celebrity. He had, I believe, like I think it was $200 million estate. And it created so many people, so many of these heirs, these kids, these cousins, aunts and uncles that came out of the woodwork saying, nope, I own this and I own that and I want a piece and I want a piece of that. So it was years. I think it may even still be going on in appeals and stuff, but years and thousands of dollars in attorney fees that eroded away. Basically, all those attorney fees were paid directly out of the estate. And there was thousands, millions of dollars in attorney fees because of the years of that, because he did not have an estate plan, which blows my mind. So it does happen.
Chadwick too.
Right.
Chadwick Boseman, the actor who played Black Panther, right? And
Yes.
what's crazy to me is he had cancer. It's not like he didn't know that was coming, but he had no will. And what was sad was I found out, Destiny, that the US government in taxes actually got more of his estate than his own wife did.
And this
Can
is
you
what
imagine being his wife?
Estate plan.
Yeah. That's why it's so important. And I feel like, Destiny, you've given a lot of great examples of like people who are in older years and have grandchildren and don't have estate plans. But can we talk for a minute? Your slide actually made me think of this. Can we talk for a minute about the young 20-year-old, 30-year-old business owner who has 2 or 3 young kids and doesn't have an estate plan? What happens to your children if something happens to you?
Right. And so they can get caught up, I mean, on a really, if there's not another parent, they can get caught up in the family system. And
Yeah.
that's horrible. And also being able to financially support them, that money, right? We don't even get to take out a lot of that money in a bank account or whatever. We are not supposed to be touching that. Sometimes you get around it, but you still have to get court orders and everything to even be able to take care of those kids. And
Right.
so, and again, remember, intestate is years. I'm telling you, especially since COVID, like this process is just even longer. It's getting a little bit better now, maybe into this year in 2024, but between like 2020 to 2020, the process was even longer. So it's not like you're going to be able to just file something and then 6 months later have an answer, unless it's just like a basic. Somebody has a car. Okay, maybe then. But those aren't the situations we're as concerned about, really, when we're talking about like children and stuff. That is going to be a long process. You're going to have things that you want to pass on to your children. You're going to want your children to be taken care of.
Yeah, and if there are exes involved, right? Like maybe your kids do have another parent, but there's a custody issue there, or you're concerned about their safety with that partner, right? Or I have one client who is a widow. She's a young widow, right? Or what if your spouse is in the military and is gone, right? They get deployed. So there's so many instances where if we can't access those funds, if we can't access the assets you have, who's going to take care of them? So I think it's just so important to have someone like her on your team and really take the time. And it is an investment. It is absolutely a large investment in some cases. Destiny's pretty affordable, I have to say. Destiny, you're doing a wonderful job of keeping your fees very reasonable for a small business owner. But even still, sometimes we look at that and we go, well, I could put that into advertising instead, or I could really go on vacation instead. And we don't think about the consequences. And as a money coach, I have to say, like, the more radical responsibility you take for your money and the more radical responsibility you take for the people around you, somehow money flows in. It flows towards you, the more radical responsibility you take for it. So it's just something to think about.
No, and that's why, we want to think about why we want to do that. Because I mean, as Sarah was saying, I really do try, guys, I'm not just saying this, I really do try to keep my costs low for my small businesses, because I know that goes back to my father of owning, a family business and knowing that he never had truly good access to attorneys. But one of my most expensive things, and I do almost all flat rates, I do flat rates for my business succession packages, and then estate planning. It's the business succession package that includes all that stuff, which includes Sarah too. It's my most expensive package. And it is because your estate planning is so important. And there is so many hours, especially on the estate planning side. So just know that.
Okay, are we ready to talk about what goes into an estate plan? What are you buying when you pay for this?
Yes, let's do that. I love it. So there are several key elements that we want to remember that create a good estate plan. You may need some of these, you may need all of these. This really is very dependent on your specific situation. But everybody, unless you have absolutely no assets, which I really don't know anyone who doesn't have assets. And if you're probably watching this, you're probably a business owner, and that means you definitely have an asset. You definitely probably have intellectual property in your business, even if you didn't know it until today, but that's an asset. And you can use, by the way, side note, intellectual property, why I love it so much is you can use it as an asset on business loans and everything else. It's so awesome. Just so you know, you can use it as collateral on a loan. You can use it for, if you're needing to get certain products or stuff to be collateral. It's amazing. Intellectual property is amazing. Okay. So if you don't know, you have assets in your business, which means you are going to need a will. This is going to be the cornerstone of your estate plan. And it's basically just a legal document where we are specifying all those things that we did earlier. Remember, we identified, we evaluated, we decided who does it. So it's where it's going to specify who you want to inherit your property. And then we're going to name that guardian, maybe for your children or whoever that may be. And whoever is going to be taking over those items and stuff like that. So this is where we're specifying also those children's situation that we were talking about earlier and all your assets and where they're going. It's just going to be a pretty, it's straightforward, but again, there's a lot of things that you've got to think about and ensure that we're talking about each asset, because that's the one thing, again, that I'm not trying to say horribly bad about LegalZoom, is like they're not going to sparse out. They're not going to be able to talk through with you sometimes where maybe you meant for, you know, all the things in your house to go to so and so, but that's not really what you meant. You really thought it was like, you know, just these basic furniture things or something. That's kind of a very broad scenario, but those are the things that when we get with you, we make sure we talk through and ensure that it's actually what you mean and we're using the right words in that will. So then
Can
the
I give
next,
another example, Destiny? Is that
yeah,
okay? Um,
absolutely.
what about an online business owner, right? Like the last thing you want to do is give your kids, while you're still alive, all of your passwords and all of your bank account information and all of the, you know, how to get past your firewall on your computer and all those things, right? Like you don't want to necessarily just like leave those lying around the house or give them to your kids. You know, what if you end up having an argument with them? Right? Like they're going to come in and steal your business from you. I'm not saying that would happen, but right, there's security in place to protect our businesses while we're alive. But the
Yep.
moment you pass away, those things better be somewhere. And if you're planning to bequeath your business or any of your intellectual property to your spouse or to your kids, we need to have a document that says not only what the assets are, but how to access them. And so when I was working with an attorney on my estate plan, Destiny, right, like we put together an actual appendix that has all my login information and all of the,
All
like, how
that
do you actually access those things, and lists out all of my books, which are part of my intellectual property, even the pen name that even my family doesn't know my pen name. Okay.
Yep.
They don't even
It's
know that I
there.
closed
It's
publishing
here
books.
now. It's all in one place. When they get it and they are emotionally upset, right? Because the biggest piece of this that I feel like you come in on, Sarah, not the legal, but that when you die, your family is so upset. They are traumatized, and it is very hard for them to think clearly for you. It is very hard for them to decide at that point what you would have wanted truly. And they don't want to
Yeah.
worry about it, right?
Right.
And so it's that emotional piece that we've got to respect and take responsibility for our children or even
Right.
our whoever that family may be that's coming in place. We've got
Yeah.
to take responsibility for that.
I
Um,
literally have instructions. It's not just instructions for probate court, right? It's
yeah,
instructions for Ben. I mean, he's never read it, right? But it's literally
that's what we'll
instructions
get
of
to in a
like,
second.
if something
That's
happens to me. Yes,
so
thank you. Sorry, we're talking. You go.
no,
You
it's
go.
a good lead in. That's actually what's going to be on here. Sometimes you can go in your will, but sometimes we're going to call that a letter of intent. That is where that one thing on the end where I have a question mark there. Sometimes we use those, sometimes we don't. Again, sometimes they go in your will, but it's going to provide additional and personal instructions that we may want to add in there that aren't necessarily something that like we can legally tell you to do.
Right.
But that's one to happen. A lot of times that's like who should take care of the pet. Okay, so like I can't legally require my mother to take my pet when I die, but I can say I would like my pet to go to my mom, and hope that that would be the thing, or where you want to be laid to rest, stuff like that, your burial and stuff like that. So that's
Yeah, and Destiny, since we're both a bit of religious people as well, I will say like part of my instruction to him is like this money has specifically been set aside for you to actually go and get counseling, or you know, for you like, okay, go meet with your pastor. Like that, I just want you to know that that is something I want, and I specifically set aside money for that, right? Like if you
yes,
have a spiritual counselor, or if you have like making sure that that person knows. And again, like here's the list of people who I think would want to buy the rights to the assets that I have, which you can't necessarily liquidate. Like you're not going to liquidate my fantasy books, right? Like there are certain assets you cannot liquidate.
no,
but here's the list of people who I think you could sell those to if you need to, if my, you know, if my
yeah,
life insurance
you don't
wasn't
have
enough or
that
something like
now.
that.
Going back to what you were saying though about if you want somebody to spend money on something specifically though, that leads right into a trust actually. So if you do want to ensure that your kids or your, I think you can do your spouse, like it's a little tricky, but your kids or a third person, and you want to make sure that like this money goes to this charity, or you want to ensure that this money only gets spent on this in this charity, or however that looks like, that's where a trust can come into place. And some other reasons, which I'll say in a second. But it's going to hold kind of those assets kind of as a person, kind of, and the person does oversee it. that benefit for that chosen beneficiary, that person, that or entity that it's left for. And you can put specific instructions. So if you ever hear of a trust fund baby, this is what they're speaking about, right? Somebody who is just drawing from the trust as it was directed by the person who died. So they can put specific directions of like, you're going to receive $8,000 a month to be spent on XYZ. You can get kind of specific on how those things are in a trust, to be honest. Trusts are very, very expensive though, and it does take a lot of money for those to survive. So that's why sometimes we're going to put it in a letter of intent, like Sarah said, versus maybe a trust, because we're going to look at how much those assets are and if it's even a reasonable thing to do. Because if it is just like a couple $100 that we have and we want you to go get that, counseling or whatever, that's not going to be something that's really worth putting in that trust to pay someone to oversee that, because we have to pay the administrator of that out of the trust. So also a trust is where we can really get in there and save taxes. So we can do things to where the money is being held in that entity and it's not necessarily being sold to like your children or whatever. And we are avoiding some of those tax issues. And it also can maintain privacy of it. So instead of this going and being all aired out to the courts, we're going to have that in a trust where they don't need to know everything about all that stuff. Nobody needs to find out that you have $1 billion estate. Maybe you don't want I don't know why you would care once you die, but people do. Yeah. That's going to also protect you. So that's a trust. These are the things that is really where it gets very expensive, is when we're dealing with trust. That's why when people say that estate plans can get very expensive, that's especially a trust. Sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. And that is where, especially, that is something you have to have an attorney do. Do not ever use LegalZoom for that. I don't even know if it does it, but if it does, stay away from that. Lastly is your power of attorneys, your financial directives, stuff like that. There are different types of POAs, stands for power of attorney. There is a durable power of attorney that allows you to appoint someone you trust to manage your financial affairs. And that if you can no longer do that, if you're unable to manage your financial affairs, there's also like a healthcare power of attorney. That's going to allow you to specify your wishes for your end of life medical care and appointing someone to make those financial decisions if you're unable to do so. So those two are very important. I think everyone, everywhere needs a will, and at least a will, and your power of attorneys and directives, okay? Those are what are super important. And we've already talked about a financial letter of intent, but if you have more questions on those, feel free to drop those in the comments. I know these can get kind of confusing and stuff, but these are going to be mostly, other than the letter of intent, these are legal documents that are going to stand up, and you won't have to have it decided in a court. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? It's going to save time. It's going to save money. It's going to save heartache. It's going to save emotions. It's going to save fights in your family. All those things and some more.
And again, like if we're talking about how do you want to be remembered, right? Obviously, there will be an initial trauma of loss. That's going to happen. But how you're remembered in the end will have a lot to do with your estate plan. It's just a fact of life, right? Are you remembered as the person who ended the 5 generations family business? It ended with you and it wasn't passed on correctly? Or are you the person? Yeah. Are you going to be remembered as, the parent who did a great job of raising their kids right up until they passed away, in which case they had nothing and their kids went to foster care, right? Like there's so many instances where things that we don't want to have happen or ways we don't want to be remembered can simply be avoided by having a piece of paper, right? At the end of the day, it really is just having the right things in place. So, and that last part, like the power of attorney, Destiny, I didn't know until this year that if Ben passed away, for example, there are bank accounts that he has that are not, that my name is not on. I'm not on those accounts. They're just happen to be in his name. I didn't realize that without a proper power of attorney, I wouldn't even been able to access those accounts if something happened to him. Like, that's crazy to me, right? I'm married. You would think I would have the immediate right to that account, but I do not.
Nope.
So I'm still learning about this, which again is why I'm so grateful that you came on today. We really, really appreciate it. So I'm going to share the slide for anybody who wants to reach out to Destiny and ask more questions. Destiny also has, I'm just going to talk you up for a minute, please. Hope I don't make you blush too much, but she also has a wonderful contracts shop at legal-fluence.com. So if you're looking for some contracts, things like that, you can check that out. Destiny is just an amazing person to work with. So please reach out to her if you have any questions at all. If it's related to estate planning, she's your girl. If it's relating to the financial aspect of this, if it's relating to, putting those systems and processes in place so that your business can be sold, I'm here for you. Okay. I can definitely help you with the business succession aspect on that point.
Go to
But
Sarah.
yeah, we are here for you.
Almost like you should almost start out with Sarah. Honestly, in my opinion, if you are looking at a business succession plan, please go to Sarah. Start out with her. That will create so many things in place that when you come to me, it's just going to be nice and easy.
Yeah, I definitely try to set you up so that by the time you sit down with your attorney, you know the right questions to ask. You have all your assets listed out, so she's not having to dig and try to figure out what she's even supposed to be protecting, right? So thank you so much again, Destiny, for coming on today. Today was really meaningful for me to be able to share this topic with everybody for Memorial Day. And I know that you're heading out to the pool after this. So I appreciate you taking the time before you head out to join us. All right.
No, enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.